Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone from wherever you are. We've got quite an international mix of quite a lot of people in North America, some people in the Middle East, Europe, etc. So it's a good mix. My name's Fred Thornton. I will be talking to you for the next 90 minutes or so about the new features that we added into pressSIGN 10. Which was released in the middle of December. For those of you who don't know me, I've been at Bodoni for 14 years and pretty much done everything here in terms of pressSIGN. So sold it, supported it, aided in the development, not writing code, I'll have you know, but certainly slightly more involved than just ideas, but quite a few ideas as well. So, as you know, pressSIGN 10 is pressSIGN 10. Version 10 implies we're a fairly mature product. The product's been around for 13 years, and we keep trying to improve it in many different ways for many different reasons. So, in no particular order, as you'll see on the screen, there are a list of new features being added. As I say, it's no particular order, no preference, no priority. It's just what I could think of while going through writing all of the different bits down. So I'll just read them for brevity or clarity, I suppose. There are some changes to the support for operating systems and licensing, improvements to or new features in the color bar tool, changes to the press targets. There's a reset option for people who've forgotten their passwords for the software. The ISIS is now supported from X-RITE. Automatic updates to make that process a bit easier for people to manage. There is a completely redesigned curve management tool. You can add additional metadata into jobs. There is a completely new window for the assessment of the dynamic density adjustment calculation. It's called estimates. There are many new views around the software. So at that point, I will break out of Keynote and kind of go into the software and point at things, or at least describe where I'm talking, where I'm pointing. So I'm not sure you can see the pointer. The CMYK spot color tool, you could call it the brand color tool as well. That's been added. The new live GPM dashboard to look at stuff as it happens across the web. And then just towards the end, I will briefly discuss what we're planning to do ready for possibly Drupal, possibly Vespa, which is only at the end of next month, and possibly just later in the year. We haven't quite decided on what gets to be added when. Anyway. So, before I start talking about the new features, I would just like to highlight the fact that whenever we launch a new version, I spend a couple of weeks going through all the new features and adding them into the pressSIGN manual. The pressSIGN manual is a how-to guide, okay, with lots and lots of screenshots to show you how to do things in the software. Okay, so just purely and purely from a support point of view, and some of you might have a little chuckle at this because I do say this quite often on the phone, but have a read of the manual before calling us or emailing for support. Okay. It is a bit of a joke, okay, in terms of lightening the mood, shall we say, but it's a serious one as well, which is you're liable to find there is the answer that you need in the manual a lot quicker, possibly, than sometimes when I get myself tongue-tied. You're liable to find the answer in the manual quicker than emailing me and waiting for a response. Okay, me or someone else at Bodoni. That doesn't mean to say I won't try and respond as quickly as possible, but it is sometimes the wrong time of day or night or the weekend for you. So the best way of looking at the manual is to open the PDF and do a find and search for the term that you're looking for. It may be in several sections because some things are configured for different reasons in different places. Okay, so jokes aside, it just helps to minimize the amount of time that it takes for people to get help. And of course, it means that you can self-support yourselves a little bit as well. Okay, so the big change from an operating system point of view is that pressSIGN 10 does not support Windows 7 or 2008 Server. Okay, we will not support them. Quite simply, you can't install the server on Windows 7 or 2008. 32-bit operating systems from Windows are no longer supported as well. So what is supported? Well, 64-bit Windows 8, Windows 8.1, Windows 10, Windows 2012 Server, Windows 2016 Server, Windows 2019 Server. 64-bit Windows 8, 2012 Server onwards. Mac OS is supported from Sierra 10.12 onwards. Seems like a kind of a simple thing. I did write it in the launch email that went out to all registered users of pressSIGN. A lot of people didn't read that and tried to install the software on Windows 7 and got into problems. Okay, and there is a real danger of losing any existing data that you have because the upgrade to version 10 is a one-way server upgrade. Okay, so if you mess it up and it's got too far, the database is dead. You won't be able to uninstall 10, go back to 9 and think everything's okay. You might be lucky if it didn't get that far. You might not be. Which is why we added a backup option in the server upgrade window for anyone that hasn't performed a backup prior to doing the upgrade. The other change is that the mobile client license is no longer sold. You do not need it to access the database via the web server component via a web browser. There's no license, therefore you can have as many people as you want accessing that database simultaneously, provided they have unique usernames with obviously passwords. Password doesn't have to be unique, but the username does. You can't have two users using the same username connected to the same database at the same time. People want to carry on using old versions and adding licenses to that, then old licensing rules would apply because it's written in the software. Okay, so color bar tool has been available in pressSIGN since version 5. And one thing that annoyed people was that we made it mandatory to have a paper patch in the color bar. Well, that is not mandatory anymore, unless you are adding tint patches into that color bar. Okay, because you can't calculate dot area and therefore the tonal value increase or dot gain if you don't have a paper patch. You need a paper patch, a solid, and a tint. Okay, so if you're putting tints into the color bar, the software will still make you add a paper patch, or at least not allow you to save it until you do. The other feature or other change, so that's a minor thing, but the other change in the color bar tool is the ability to rotate and mirror color bars of any description. So the screenshot that's just slid into view shows a couple of extra buttons in the middle, just under the count 300 area. One is a backwards pointing arcing arrow, which essentially means click me and I rotate anti-clockwise by 90 degrees. The button next to it, which is the double-ended arrow, is the mirror button. Okay, so mirror it one way, mirror it the other. To highlight this, the screenshot is showing the import of the P2P25 chart, which if anyone has tried to do that in the older versions will have found out is written in the way that the software is showing it in the screenshot that you're looking at the moment, which is to say that it looks different when you import it compared to the way it looks and the way you will measure it actually on the printed chart. So by clicking the rotate anti-clockwise button 3 times, we can get the color bar to be the right way round, albeit almost the right way round, because actually it's kind of back to front. It needs to be mirrored. So clicking the mirror button means that everything reverses. So that means that we can actually measure the P2P without having lots of bad measurements, because the preview of the color bar needs to match the way the data is going to be recorded by the spectrophotometer. Otherwise, it doesn't work. And that's been quite annoying for a number of people over the years. Simple little change, but hopefully quite helpful in certain scenarios. Press targets are one of the biggest things that we've rather had the most changes to it, shall we say, for a number of different reasons. Some of these are to do with the adoption of print processes or the use of pressSIGN by printers of print processes that weren't necessarily the focus of the software originally. So 13 years ago, when we first launched and designed the software, it was all about 12647. It was all about process standardization, and it was very good at that. Over the years, and the list of users that we have on the webinar today proves this, but over the years, printers from all different process types have started using the software for the same reasons, which is that we want to verify that the software, the print is color accurate, and have some understanding of what we need to do in order to change things. So from that perspective, a lot of the changes in version 10 are all focused around improving things for the digital market, the Flexo market, or labels and things like that. So at the top of the list there is the adoption or addition of the ABC certification levels for ISO 15311. which if you're not aware of it's just a standard for digital printing. ABC is essentially good, okay, and not so good. Using the same criteria. You could have really done it in the software using dark green, light green, and amber, you know, the colors, but of course 15331 kind of adds a framework for that assessment of ABC. In addition to that way of assessing the print, so rather than a percentage that would be shown in the software, if you choose the ABC option, it will say A, B, or C, and probably a dark green under A, amber under B, red under C, or maybe light green and amber. I forget actually which way around it is. We can have a look at that when I've got the software open, if I remember. Another thing that's been added are the ability for separate delta E and separate delta H tolerances for the CMYK primary solids for a couple of different reasons. You might be doing G7 certification and need to have a different tolerance for black. You might be doing 12647-7 proof verification and need to be able to report the delta H for the CMYK solids, even though you're using delta E 2000, which I'm still not really sure why they continue to do that. But anyway, you can do that in the software now, and it's just a checkbox, which you'll see in a minute because I've got a screenshot. But the other side of things from a proof verification option is the 95th percentile requirement, which is there now as well. Again, just a tick box. Following the grey balance option, or the G7 option rather, there are some grey balance targeted and color space presets for G7. So because you have to have different things being assessed in those different levels, they're presets, which means you have to create a different press target for each of those levels. It can't be done in the same way as the ABC option for 15311 because they require different patch sets and or ascending patch sets, shall we say. So grey balance obviously just literally some grey balance patches. Targeted, you've got more patches. Color space, you've got lots more patches, and as a result of increasing the number of patches, you are assessing them with additional things on top of what was the level before as well. So it has to be done as a preset, and you have to create a separate press target for grey balance, targeted, and color space. From a brand management point of view, we had some feedback from some brand managers who wanted the ability for a press target to fail a job if one of their key criteria was not perfect. So it might be grey balance that needs to be all within tolerance. It might be spot colors. It might be CMYK primaries. It's your choice. The job fail option can be selected for any of the scoring criteria, and we'll simply change an 85% score to fail if that selected job fail criteria is less than 100%. So if the grey balance goes out slightly, rather than being 83% or 80%, it's a fail because that metric isn't being controlled. And the last thing on that list there is the ability to quickly create a new press target from a measured sheet using either a menu command or a keyboard shortcut. I think it's something like Shift, Control, and number 5 or something like that. You're in a job, you've got a measurement, and you want to make a press target from that. Might be a previously printed sheet, might be an OK sheet. It's up to you. Press the keyboard shortcut, and the profile in the background will be made from that data, and the next window open where you name it and choose the tints that you want to use and the gray balance separations and all those types of things. Pretty much the bit before you save it, essentially, is open straight away. So it saves you a little bit of time. Rather than going into job settings, then add press target, then select measured press sheet from the list, etc. It's just it's a keyboard shortcut to make it a little bit quicker for some users. So what does that look like in principle? Well, the target screenshot you've got in front of you, I've selected the custom target for the CMYK primaries, although I didn't actually change the numbers to be different. And I've activated the delta H option for the CMYK primaries as well. I didn't select the job CMYK fail. I didn't change. I didn't select any of the what we call the. Oh, I've forgotten what the word deal breaker. That's it. The deal breaker button. I haven't selected those, but you can see them at the bottom of each kind of section. So just under the delta H area, you've got CMYK fail under 100. Underneath the secondaries, the production and two-color overprint area, you've got secondaries fail, you've got spot fail, all average delta E maximum fail. So there's a deal breaker fail button for any scoring criteria. At the bottom of the screen, you can see that I've got pass fail selected for that press target, which is much more a -7 proof verification way of assessing a job. If I clicked on it, I would have the percentage option, which is the default, and I would also now have the ISO 15311. At the top of the window in the tolerances preset list, if I clicked on it, I would have those G7 gray balance targeted and color space presets, which would, by selecting it, would change all of the selected scoring criteria and tolerances, delta E selections, etc., to make life quick and easy. Okay, so going back to my my first point about reading the manual so that you might help reduce the amount of support by actually finding the answer quicker than waiting for me to reply on email. One of the other things that causes quite a few issues in terms of support is people forgetting their usernames or passwords. Now, it's quite simple. We've added a reset option, or two reset options really. From the login window, as you can see on the left-hand side screenshot, there is a kind of like an underlined link that says forgotten account password, which if you click, opens the screenshot on the right. The two options for resetting someone's password are, if the admin user still knows their password and they're standing in front of the computer, kind of shaking their head, looking at the user saying, why have you forgotten your password? the admin user can put their username and password in, and then on the next window, they can select the username from a list and then just enter a new password. Save it, and then the user can log in. Now, if the administrator user, if all or any of the administrator users forget their password, or there might only be one. If it's the only admin user, previously the way for us to get around that would be to do a remote support session, log in to the database directly via the SQL tables and literally start editing an SQL table, which of course meant that you had to wait for someone like me to be able to log in and do it, which sometimes takes longer than you want. With the online account ID button, so you click the forgotten account password, you click the online account ID button, and that takes you to a website, in which you need to enter the captcha code to prove that you're a human being. Okay. Once you've done that, an email will be sent to the registered email address of the licensee on pressSIGN.com. Okay. Now, for most people, that will be the admin user or the person who set up pressSIGN at the company at that time. So it's always a good idea, if that person has left, it's always a good idea to let us know so we can update or reallocate the license to the new user. Only we can do that. In some instances, if you bought the software from one of our resellers, it will be registered to the reseller because they've done it for you to make life easy. Now, if that's the case, that email will go through to them. Now, you only have half an hour in which to use the code that is in that email. Okay. And the code goes in the screenshot at the top. It might also be that the computer you're on, that you're doing this password reset from, doesn't have internet connection. Okay. If you don't have another installation of pressSIGN on another computer that does have an internet connection, of course you can do the forgotten password reset from that computer. You'll see in the screenshot at the top there is a little underlined URL link, which essentially means that you can copy the web address that goes to that captcha code page, use it on another computer, do the captcha code, the email goes through to the registered user, and then you put in the code from the email and then select the username that you want to change the password for, enter the password, and then you can save it and log in. So it's completely manageable from the user's perspective now, which means, of course, we don't have to do that, which is great. As long as your security settings allow you to access the web page in question, which we're finding some people don't, which is a bit annoying. So, moving on. The X-RITE ISIS wasn't really a device that you would think about using with pressSIGN up until the last few years, where people want to measure bigger charts of lots of patches. Again, kind of the 95th percentile option for verification means you're measuring a profiling chart of 1,600 pages or whatever. That would take quite a while with a handheld device. So hence we have added more support, and will be adding more support for the chart reader type devices. As you probably know already, we already support all the Barbieri Spectro, so Spectro Connect, Spectro Swing, Spectro Pad, Spectro LFP, X-RITE's I1 IO table, and now the ISIS. It's a USB connection. However, we do only support single page charts at the moment. Okay, that's something that we'll be thinking about changing in due course. But at the moment, if you want to measure a multi-line chart, a multi-page chart, you can do that in I1 Profiler using the demo license. Essentially, you don't have to have a proper I1 Profiler license. You can measure the chart in I1 Profiler and then export the measurement file and just import it into pressSIGN. But direct support is single page. The ISIS 2 can do M0, M1, and M2. But you do have to make sure you get all your dimensions correct. So the patch dimensions in your strip definition, and also the dimensions of the positioning of the chart on the print itself. So you have a number of different X and Y coordinates, which are described visually on the configuration window. But straightforward, you put those details in, connect, shove the paper in, and off it goes, or press the scan button, shove the paper in, and off you go when you've got a job open in pressSIGN. So nice and simple, and it chugs away and measures your chart in a few minutes. Okay. It'd be nice to have like a doodle poll or something configured so that I can find out who has actually used automatic updates successfully yet, or not. The check for updates option does not work anymore in version 10. I don't think it even exists. Maybe grayed out, we might have taken it out. The simple fact is that it was something that someone had to do. They would then have to wait for the download, which might take quite a while. And of course, some people didn't check for updates and therefore didn't know there were newer versions that had bug fixes and new features, etc. Automatic updates changes that. So the way it works is all automatic, as the name suggests. It's actually done by the licensing server in the background, and it checks our licensing database, or rather it checks essentially a README on bodoni.co.uk, which tells it the latest version number and build number. And if the installed version and build number is lower than the new one, it will automatically download the server and client installers in the background without you having to do anything. Now, the version check uses port 443, which for those experts in amongst you there will know port 443 is used as a licensing check for the GPM, the Global Print Management subscription version. So we're using the same port that we're using for licensing check. And the downloads are also done using port 443, but from presssign.com. So if you are a GPM subscription user and you've already created a firewall or proxy rule for port 443, if you made it specific to bodoni.co.uk, you'll have to update it to add presssign.com. Otherwise, the downloads won't work. However, as long as all of that's configured, which doesn't take very long, the first thing a user will know is that an update button will appear in the toolbar of the client. And if you want to update, you click the button, and then the installer starts, and it'll install the server and the client on the server. Once the server is updated to the new version, the remote clients on other computers will have been logged out during that process. People will try and log back in again. They'll get a message at that time that says, the server's been updated, you need to update the client. Now, you don't, the whole system is designed to minimize the amount of downloading at the point that you actually want to do the update. So rather than downloading the whole installer again, the client installer for the OS that the client is installed on will be copied across the network from the server to the client computer via the ports that we use between the client and the server. So there's no firewall implications, etc. And it will just transfer it and start running and install, and then everyone's happy. So we did have a few issues with the first release with the automatic updates. My advice is, if you were on the release candidate, which was something like build 179, as in 10079, go to pressSIGN.com, download the latest release, which is something like 94 on the end, or even 101 on the end, and then update the client and server from there, and then it should kind of start working from then on. If not, let us know. Okay, so one of the biggest changes in the software, sometimes possibly the most confusing as well, is the change to the curve management, or the ability to export curve files for RIPs of any description that we support, whether it's a digital RIP like Fiery XF or Caldera, Onyx, or a CTP RIP for Prinect, or workflow for Prinect, or XMF, or Apogee, etc. The old way of doing things involved exporting files, and then someone had to keep those files so that if you wanted to update them, you could then re-import them, or rather read them during the update process. The new interface, which you can see on screen, gets away with that whole I have to worry about keeping the file process, because have to be saved into the database before you can do anything with them. Okay, so in the screenshot, I've got a curve in the list at the top. If I wanted to create a new curve based on the measurement that you can see in the panel with the tints, etc., in the middle, I would have to click away from the curve. So I basically unhighlight the current curve, and then the update button would change to be save. I can either click the save button, or I can click the plus button in order to add a new curve. Okay, if I've got a curve highlighted, the save button changes to update, and the plus button is grayed out, because you can't add a new curve into an existing curve. Alternatively, if I don't want to overwrite the curve, I can click the double plus button, which means duplicate and update. So one curve is just a copy, the original, and then the update happens to the duplicate. So you get to rename the duplicate, the updated duplicate that is, with a new name, so that things don't get confusing. Quite simply, you can't have two curves of the same name. It doesn't work. Okay, but all the rest of the settings are the same in terms of the file formats, the types of files that you can export, whether they're measured files or target files or calibration curves, etc. So if you want to export a new curve, you have to make it first, and then you highlight the curve and click the export button, and it will give you a file just like normal. At some point in a second, when the text starts arriving, it will just reiterate all of that for you. So all curves have to be saved into the database. If it's an existing curve in a workflow and you've got a file from the workflow, you need to import it in the database before you can update it. It's gone too far. Go back. Right, it's right. Okay, so all curves have to be saved or imported. Import, click the left arrow, browse to the file. To save, click the plus button or the save button, provided you haven't got an existing curve selected. You want to update a curve once it's in the database. You highlight the curve. You obviously select your export options in terms of text file format, type of file, etc. Whether you want to include all of the colors on the checkboxes on the left, what type of curve, whether it's 4CX, TVA, or NPDC, and then click the update button, or the duplicate button, as I've said, which is the double plus. Once the curve is updated, you simply highlight it, click the right pointing arrow to export based on your settings that you've chosen. And it is that simple, to be honest. Once you get used to it, it is different to the way we did it before, but once you get used to it, it's quite straightforward. And it means you don't have to worry about having to find the old exported file. Okay. So if you recall, nearer the start, maybe not at the start, but near the start, I mentioned we were adding features to enhance the usability for, let's just say, the less well represented print processes of the digital and kind of other offset processes like flexogravure, etc. And that's just a historical thing. Okay, don't think it's because we like litho more than anything else. The software can actually be used to measure any print from any print process. Okay, but obviously, if you are working in a non-litho arena, there are things that you might want to know about the job which the software wasn't tracking for you. Short answer now is that you can, because we have added the ability for you, the user, to add your own job and metadata fields, which can be tracked by the database into a job. So in the new job window, there is a job data button, as you can see, which if you click on it, it opens the screenshot that you can see. And the add button at the bottom allows you to add any kind of criteria. The ones you see in the screen are not representative of what is included in the software because there aren't any. You simply click add, and then you are allowed to type freely the name of the key you want to use, and a value and a default value. Default value will always be used unless you go in and edit the value. Okay, so I've put a few different things to give you an idea of what we're talking about. So analogs chosen in a job? Well, different analogs can hold more or less ink. So if your job, from one job to another, if the coverage of those jobs change, it's appropriate to change from one type of analogs to another. However, that could take time, and more time than the printer might want to spend changing those things out. So I appreciate that it isn't necessarily done as often as it should be, but from a consistency point, from a print quality management point, even from a kind of a process standardization perspective, it's good to know which setting, which analogs was used when the job was run. Same goes for blade angle, pressures, viscosity. Quite a lot of those things are obviously flexo based, but it might be number of passes or DPI from a digital perspective. Those are just illustrative, okay? If I have misspoken on any of those, or there are other things that you might think are more relevant, fine, add them, okay? It's all I've done is to add a few ideas, okay? You can use the field in the way that you want to. It's up to you. All you have to do is, as I say, enter the name, the value, the default value, and then those things become searchable in the open job window. It's not something you can create an advanced search for. It is simply that you add or search in the simple search field in the top left-hand corner. So if you're looking for a job with an analog set at 250, you write analogs 250, and it should go away and find all the jobs with those settings. And that means that you can track the performance of jobs with different settings compared to normal. Okay, so on to the changes in the user interface that involve different views. There are quite a few improvements, adjustments to views, which I'll go into next. But the new window, so there's an extra icon in the toolbar, is the estimates window. And to help you assess the accuracy of the dynamic density adjustment calculation, which has been improved in version 10. I couldn't tell you how that's been improved, other than the fact that it's been changed to better or be more accurate, I suppose. It would be quite a long conversation, I'd imagine, if I was to be able to go into it, but I actually don't know how it's been changed, so I couldn't tell you. But it's more accurate, apparently, and the estimates window gives you an idea of what is happening from a hue shift perspective as you add more ink to the sheet in terms of density. So the window plots all of the samples measured on an A/B axis. It gives you the best delta E, the best density, and it can give you an estimated LABCH value at that density, and also an estimated delta E. You can play around a little bit. There's a slider at the bottom which you can move to the left, which gives you the estimated LAB of that density. And you can move it to the right to look at the higher density. So left, lower, right, higher. When you do that, you'll notice the gray dot that travels along the black kind of line, which looks a bit like a U on screen for the magenta we're looking at. The gray dot will travel along that line to give you an idea of how the hue shifts. You'll also notice that there is a pair of kind of concentric rings around most of the dots. There is a dot that's outside the ring, and that's actually outside of the delta E tolerance, because those concentric rings are the line at which the delta E would the maximum area. You know, it's just a visual representation of the delta E tolerance. There are two of them, because one of them is at the L value of the target. So that's obviously where you're going to get the kind of the broadest spread of colors. And the one that's slightly inside that is actually at the L value of the sample, or the estimated target density, to highlight the fact that, you know, if we're a bit dark or a bit light, we're going to get a smaller area in which you know 5 delta E is achievable. So you can do lots of playing around and assessment of all sorts of things with that view. Okay, and the next window pretty much basically just says all of that. So you have to have a job open. The job has to have measurements, and you have to have a good number of measurements to really make it work properly, because of course we can't really estimate what's going to happen to the hue, because you've only got one measurement. Okay. So, as I said, there are lots of new views. Updated icon for the application. Some people think it looks too much like the Photoshop icon. We kind of disagree, but you know, it's not going to change because it's now a version non-specific icon, so it will probably stay the same for a good while. But the Photoshop icon is square, got a blue background, and the P and the S are capital P, small s. The pressSIGN icon is circular with a grey background, mid-grey in actual. The P is small and the S is big. So I don't think they look the same. I think they're quite noticeably different, but still. There you go. So the icons in the toolbar have changed to be slightly fresher. The toolbar is now configurable so that you can show it or not. You can show the icons or not, and you can show the labels or not. Any combination thereof. The coloring is now fixed along with the job window to the side of the main window, so that's a unified main window. But the color inspector window is now context aware, which means that if you point at a tint patch, it will show you a TVI value amongst the other things that it's always shown you. If you point at a gray balance patch, it will show you the delta E that you are using in the press target, or whatever you've selected in the press target. So if it's delta CH, it's delta E 2000, etc., it will show you the value that was shown in the bottom right hand corner of the main window. The color inspector window, as with all areas now, will show you the chroma and hue in addition to the lab for whatever patch you're looking at. You've got the delta E tolerance lines, which I showed you in the previous slide. In the color inspector window, as with other areas in the software, there color comparison panel, which used to just show the sample and target split between a diagonal line. That panel color comparison window now shows you a third area, which, depending on what you're pointing at, will either be the effect of a calibration curve if you're pointing at a tint, so it will say calibrated, or whether dryback is affecting the color, or so technically the text in there is actually wrong. It will say estimates. So the color of the estimated target density will be shown as well, and hopefully because of the new improved dynamic density adjustment algorithms, the estimated color should pretty much match the target, or that would be the hope anyway. Again, for the kind of the non-offset style printers, we've added an LAB spiderweb view, which is in the main window. It's in various other windows as well. That means that you, instead of looking at TVI or the NP kind of graphs in the main window, you can have a spider web plot showing the hue shift as you add more tint from 0 to 100. In the single patch window, there's also a 3D plot of that as well, if you want to get a little bit more technical about it. The estimates window I've already shown you. The soft proof window now will show an ink profile along the bottom, which obviously gives you a rough idea of where to put the ink keys to start the job, where the coverage is from one side of the sheet to the other for the inks in question. That's only CMYK at the moment because softproof only supports CMYK, but obviously making it multicolor, etc., etc., is something that we plan to do at some point in the future. The unified main window I've already shown you, or rather discussed. Quite simply, people had issues with the floating color inspector and job window that move them around on different screens and stuff, especially if they had two screens, and then they would lose them and they wouldn't be able to find them, which was very painful sometimes. So they are unified into one main window now. You can, using the same keyboard shortcuts as before, so that's kind of Apple I or Control I for the color inspector, and Apple J or Shift Apple J for the job window. You can hide them. There's a little drag icon that you can just kind of move them out of the way, or kind of hide them as well. And then in the open job window, the columns are configurable. So to give you a brief idea of those things, I will open pressSIGN for a minute and just kind of point you around. I've been sharing the application, so if I just start sharing both for a second. I've got the spider web on the main window, which, as I said before I muted myself, is something that people in the digital market wanted to see more than, say, TVI. Okay, I think TVI is still valid as a metric because, you know, it is quantitative way of assessing whether the prints change, but the spider web gives you a view of how those inks are changing from a hue perspective as you add more tint to go through the tint range from paper to solid. I was pointing down here at pointing out the differences in the shapes of the delta tolerances line for these spot colors because of the fact that I'm using delta 2000 to assess those spot colors, and the calculation for delta 2000 has the weighting in it to describe the or rather the difference our eyes and brain have at assessing color difference of different colors. That's all I'm going to say. But yeah, so the different shapes and sizes because the colors are different, and we're better at seeing the difference of in color of some colors compared to others. But that is something that is a user preference. You just simply tip or click, sorry, the different tabs along the top there to change, and you know, it means you can also evaluate one or the other or all three in a job quite quickly. Okay, so the single patch window, if I'm not assessing just solids, will also show me the spider web. But as you saw, I can filter down on a specific color and then click solid, and I get a similar window, which is all of these solids measured in the job, plot as an A plot. That actually in the later versions of 9.2 towards the end of last year. So it's not technically a version 10 feature, but I thought I'd show you anyway because most people don't know it's there. It's similar to the estimates window, but you've got the list of measurements with delta E and density, etc. on the right hand side, whereas in estimates you need to point at the patch in order, or the different dots rather, in order to see the data. And then I did some dragging and dropping of the slider to highlight the fact that the dot moves up and down the black line. I'm going to give the soft proof window a go. Every time I've tried it during one of these webinars, it's not worked, and then I moaned to Lee about it, and it did work. But that was possibly because I was using a job with a pressSIGN 4 press target in it. So there we go, it's working. And as you can see along the bottom, I have got an ink profile showing where the coverage for each of the colors is being used. What I would say, though, they look surprisingly the same on this particular job. That's possibly something I need to look at in due course. Oh, and the other aspect that I hadn't got onto before I muted myself was the context aware color inspector in the top right hand corner. So I've pointed at a 40% black. I've got TVI values. I've got different TVI values for what has been printed and what is estimated, or what it would be at the estimated value. So that's quite quite interesting. We're going to see that if we move the black solid up by 9%, that obviously the dot gain on the 40 would go up. We also have the color preview of the estimate compared to the target, etc., compared to the print. So I think that is all of the new views that I mentioned. CMYK spot color tool. Okay, so we haven't got many things to go, so appreciate you hanging in there, and hopefully you haven't fallen asleep yet. One of the more interesting tools to have been added, lots of people have given us some hearty praise for adding it, is the CMYK spot color tool. Could just as well call it the brand color tool, okay, because it's a tool that allows you to work out or calculate the CMYK separation of a spot color, because someone doesn't want to print it as a spot color, they want to print it as CMYK. That might be because it's being printed on a CMYK press, like a digital press, or any other reason for cost. So rather than adding the extra cost of a spot color plate onto an offset job, it can be done out of CMYK because it's it's a budget product or something like that. As you can see in the screenshot, you select your spot color from a library. You can choose whether to make the CMYK version relative to the paper. That would be the paper in the press target in the job you've got open. You can choose whether you use all of the CMYK colors. You can enter a minimum dot percentage. You can choose whether you force it to calculate using all of the CMYK, or whether just to ignore black, for example. And it gives you a list of about, I think, the top 10 sorted on the Delta, and it gives you the LAB values and the delta, the chrome and hue difference, etc. There is also a tool just underneath the spot color selection field, which allows you to just simply enter a CMYK value to calculate a lab value, or you can enter a lab value and calculate a CMYK, which use the left and right pointing arrows. And again, when I use a screenshot at the start, it just means I've already discussed what I'm just about to put on the screen. So I'll wait for that to come up. And just to say on that subject that it's really something that you can use before a job, or during a job, I suppose. It's probably something you're going to do before a job, because obviously if you do want to put a specific CMYK separation into the job, you're going to have to rip the spot color in the color bar to use that separation that you've calculated. You might rip it, or you might just convert it in Photoshop or something like that and add the specific CMYK separation in at that point. Now, from pressSIGN's point of view, once you've calculated, or you've chosen your separation that you want to use as the CMYK spot color, you can actually add that as a spot color in a custom spot color library, and then you'll be able to select the CMYK version of that spot color in a job when you're starting a job in pressSIGN, and that spot color will be assessed in the same way as a normal spot color in terms of delta E and all that sort of stuff. But it knows that it's a CMYK version of the spot color when you're measuring it and what have you. Anyway, have a go, find out. It's good. And lastly, this is the second time I'll dip out of Keynote and go into a kind of a more live demonstration. Lastly is the live GPM dashboard, which the name implies is only for the global print management subscription licensees. Okay, it's not something that dongle-based users get to use. It does require that you install a web server on a PHP-based web server on the pressSIGN server computer, and you should get an experienced IT professional to do that for you. The configuration from a pressSIGN point of view is that once you've done all that PHP configuration, you simply install the pressSIGN server and select the dashboard or web dashboard option in the installer, and then point pressSIGN to the www root folder, and then everything works itself out. But the whole point of the live dashboard is that it is live, hence the name. And what that means is that when jobs are added to the database, that the window refreshes and updates automatically without a user having to refresh the screen or resubmit an SQL query that they've created, which is what you had to do with the old web interface. Now, the old web interface is still there. Okay, you can still use it. It's perfectly valid. It's got all of the email scheduling stuff if you're a GPM user, or not if you're a dongle-based user. But it's still got all of those, the scatter graphs, the pie graphs, the pie charts, the year-to-date stuff, etc., league tables and what have you. That's all still there, but the live dashboard is separate to that. And as I say, requires that you have a PHP-based web server running. So in order to show you this, it's easier to actually connect to a live dashboard. The Bodoni logo will be whatever you've set as, so it can be branded, whatever you set as the logo during the pressSIGN server installation. So if you've already branded your server, it will come up with your company logo in. The usernames and passwords, because you're connecting to the same database, are the same. But of course, if you have multiple users logging in, they all have to have unique usernames, because you can't, the one username can't be used by two different people on two different computers at the same time. However, because it's connecting via the web server, the same user can be connected via the client application and the dashboard or web service. So the point is, if you've got two people connecting to the dashboard simultaneously using the same username, that won't work, but one on the client and one on the web server will, which is probably more complicated than we need to go into at the moment. But as you can see, it is slightly more pleasing on the eye than the old web environment. You can turn things on and off. So we've got kind of various jobs over a certain criteria. We can change the number of, we can change the filtering. Really? Oh, right, you have to play it. Okay. Down there. Okay, so we've got different sets. We've got job things. Like these kind of things are interactive. So we can change various different criteria. I haven't used it massively. So if you start using it and you have questions, feel free to email us and ask them, or if you have suggestions, then again, feel free. We can change various different criteria for what will be included. So, as I say, it will update. So the idea is that if you've got a large amount of printing factories sending data into a central data center, which can only be done with a global print management subscription, of course, hence why it's a subscription only feature. But if you've got lots of data arriving in a central data center, then you can see things change at a glance. So you could put that up onto a screen somewhere in the quality department or customer service department, etc., etc. And then people would be able to see things happen as it happens. Just reiterate, it is something that you should get experienced IT person to do. It is not something we will do. The configuration of the web server, it's not something we're going to do as part of support for the product, because it's not part of our product, the web server bit. If you really want us to do it, we would have to work out a charge, because it can be quite time consuming if things aren't configured on the server properly. Okay, so what are we planning for the future? So obviously we've got to the end of the webinar, and this is now the bit where we go, we didn't quite get to do everything we wanted in version 10 because of time constraints. So it's just a few things, a few kind of sneak peeks at things that will come in 10 during the year as dot releases. So the new Konica Minolta Euro, or My Euro spectrophotometer is being worked on at the moment, and I hope to be demonstrating it at Vespa in the Color Lab, where I'll be. It is apparently priced to compete with the i1 Pro, and seems to be quite a nice device. We did promise to do the FT9 and the FT5 BT. We will have to do those later this year. Obviously, X-RITE have launched the i1 Pro 3, i1 Pro 3 Plus, new i1 IO Table 3. So at some point when X-RITE send us those units to work on, we will do those as well, along with the sphere-based CI6X range, because there are some packaging printers out there who would like to use it. And on the same kind of area, packaging, labels, that kind of stuff, who use transmissive and foil-based substrates, where you have to print a white background ink. We will be looking to add a control mechanism so that pressSIGN will give ink corrections for such printers so that they can get the same color printed across the sheet, so it's even, and therefore their base, like the paper is, or a white paper, sorry, is consistent across the sheet. Because if the white ink isn't the same color across the sheet, then the ink on top of it isn't going to look the same either. And it's the same when you're painting walls as well. If you don't put an even white coat down first on an uneven surface, you won't get the same color. Anyway, ISO 20616 is, I believe, in the process of being published. For anyone that doesn't know what 20616 is, it is essentially the print quality exchange format, the ISO that defines how to write print quality data into a file, including job details rather than just measurement details, but it includes job details as well, so that a file written by one application can be imported into another application. So at some point, possibly for Drupal, that may be included. And then the last thing that certainly, there's quite a lot to be getting on there, but one of the other things, or the last thing that I thought was something we should be doing sooner rather than later, especially in 10, is that we are, or should be, trying to eliminate the possibility of non-compliance in the job synchronization in the GPM version. And by that, I mean the use of incorrect settings. So at the moment, a printer can send data to a brand manager or their group data center with the wrong settings, or settings that make the job seem better than it is, which of course means that if you're trying to assess whether a particular printing factory is printing as well as another printing factory, if they're using different settings, then the whole assessment process becomes rather prosaic and inaccurate. So from a brand management kind of or process control standardization process for large printing groups, using the Global Print Management subscription license, of course, at the moment they can synchronize settings down to the local printing factories, but there's no requirement for those printing factories to actually use those settings. So the idea is that if they do a job for a certain client, then because that client has come from the remote server, it will force them to use one of the certified settings that has also come from the same server. That's the working idea on that anyway, and that should mean that they can only use settings that have been verified as correct. and therefore everyone should be using the same settings and scoring in the same way, and therefore the assessment of all of those printing factories within that group should become much easier. That's the end. We have reached the end. I'm sure some of you are probably thanking your lucky stars that we've managed to make it. Thanks very much, and have a pleasant day, stroke, evening, stroke, night,